Hello, and welcome to the Wanderings podcast, a photographer's exploration of art, science, and world culture. I am your host, Pedro Bonatto, a fine art and advertising photographer based in Toronto, Canada. In this show, I talk to artists, designers, scientists, filmmakers, authors, entrepreneurs, people who are creating inspiring work in a variety of fields. I have been working as a professional photographer and as a musician for a few years, and I'm often inspired by history, science, mythology, and popular culture in the photographs that I create. In this podcast, I try to go a little bit deeper in the stories that inspire me, and I hope will inspire you too. Sometimes you go through experiences that you wish everyone could have, and you want to tell all the world about it. A few months ago, I had my first flotation session in a sensory deprivation tank. Flotation involves lying on a saltwater solution in a very spacious tank. There is no light or sound. The temperature of the water and the air is the same as that of your body, and you basically feel like you're floating in space. You get a chance to disconnect from the world and focus on your own thoughts and feelings. And you get a sense of profound peace and relaxation, a deep concentration, and increased creativity. To talk about this experience, my guests are Jesse Ratner-Decle and Anand Ondhia from Float Toronto. And we talked about the benefits of flotation therapy and the fascinating history behind sensory deprivation tanks. One of the great things about Jesse and Anand was learning how they turned their passion into a successful business. And we also talked about their journey into making flotation more accessible to people of all kinds. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Anand and Jesse. Let's start this. So Jesse and Anand, welcome to the Wanderings podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having us, Pedro.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, so just right off the bat, I found a Float Toronto a couple of months ago that my wife gave me as a gift because I was telling her how much I wanted to try sensory deprivation tanks and all that. And then I went there, and then yesterday I had my third experience in the tank. Amazing. And I remember on the second one, Anand was telling me and every time it would be different and everything. And to me, even yesterday, I was like, whoa, that was actually much different. And I was even telling him next time I actually want to go for 2 hours, because at the end of the hour, it's okay, you're focused, you're good. So I got really in love with this, and then that's why I decided to get you guys on the podcast. So excited to talk to you.
Amazing.
Yeah, cool. So just right off the bat, let's just get started. Maybe Jesse, can you tell a little bit about how you got into the flotation business? We'll talk about what it is exactly, but just how did you fall into it?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty specific kind of story of how we got into it. We were listening to Joe Rogan, listening to his podcast. That was the first introduction to the phrase floating or sensory deprivation. The first place we heard it was there, and then it was just kind of became a little bit of a hobby of ours. I was living in Vancouver at the time. Anand must have heard about it at around the exact same time, but out here on the East Coast. And at that time, which is about 8-9 years ago, there was not too many float tanks in operation. So it was pretty hard to actually find one that you could climb in and have an experience. So, like I said, we kind of started floating as a hobby. We traveled around Canada and the States, visiting different float centers and different home tanks that people had set up. And then later on, kind of figured that if this was something we wanted to continue doing, then the best strategy would be to open a commercial flotation center. It seemed like this kind of idea that we had been waiting for almost.
Oh, that's amazing.
And so we then kind of started this mission to figure out how that would look.
Yeah. Cool. And how about you, Anand?
For me, so it's probably around the same time we're probably all listening to Joe Rogan, like a lot of the people who come into the float center. He's been very responsible for this new wave of floating. But I found it through hearing about it through him, but also being into yoga and my own practice and my own meditation, but also using yoga teaching, which what I was getting into at the time, as a way to
show other people the way to meditation. And so I found in each of my approaches, I would take more and more of a direct approach, and facilitating people going into the tank and having these experiences for themselves was like something that really stood out to me. So that's how I got into providing it, after like really loving it, after only doing it like twice before we opened up at Float. So
oh wow,
yeah.
Oh, cool. All right.
Yeah.
And so it's like you said, it's like about 9 years ago you started floating.
Yeah.
And you as well.
About 5.
About 5.
Yeah.
Oh,
So like
okay.
I did a couple a year before Float opened, and then I was like, okay, let's see who's doing it.
When I first heard about it, when I first heard Joe talking about it, it was over a year, maybe even 2, before I actually found a float tank.
Right.
You know, there just wasn't many places to try it. We were in Vancouver at the time.
Right.
Like I first floated in this lady's basement that was 2 hours outside of Vancouver. And I went there with my brother, and she didn't even filter the tank between us. Like there was it was this old style. It was kind of covered in some kind of wooden barrier that she had built herself, so I couldn't even tell what kind of tank it was. I think it was a samadhi, that as I look back on it, if anybody knows like the actual styles of float tanks.
Oh yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that, the technology of that. But that's so interesting. Like for me, I remember reading about it, like again, about 10 years ago, but I was reading, there was this physicist, maybe you guys heard about him, like Richard Feynman. So he actually was with John Lilly. We're going to probably talk about him too. But then when he did, that's early, like I guess like 70s. And then he did the flotation, like he went to the sensory deprivation tank, and then like basically he wrote about it in his book. I think it's Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman. So it's like a crazy guy that he's like physicist and he's a drummer. And he said, then he started, it's like, oh, that sounds interesting. And then later on, it's like, oh, maybe I'll do it sometime. And then again, I saw it like Rogan talking about the thing. It's like, okay, a bunch of people that I actually like really like speak highly of it. And then this year, I did my first flotation. It was absolutely fantastic. Cool. So how about opening the business? How was that journey like? So like 9 years ago, and you Flow Toronto started what, like a couple of years ago, or when?
Just over 4 years.
Oh, right. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yes, we've been open for just over 4 years. It's been incredible. It's just been an incredible journey of a lifetime, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like, you know, there's not too many people you can turn to for guidance in this industry, especially when you kind of talk about the operations of the business. You know, even the manufacturers at the time, there weren't too many. There's a few more now. And a year ago, we actually completely revamped our center. We did a full renovation and completely switched out our older tanks, which were a little bit smaller and a little bit more like a lot of people are probably imagining, like, you know, like more kind of how you crouch in it and a little more coffin-like. I don't like to say that, but they were compared to the ones we have now, which are really large.
Yeah.
And you actually stand up as you walk into them, almost like a walk-in fridge. But yeah, in terms of developing the business, we connected with some guys in Portland, Oregon, who had been running a center for a few years before us. So we were able to go down there and sort of do an apprenticeship type of program with them, where they basically showed us all the things that they messed up on along the way,
right,
so that we could save a lot of money and a lot of time. And, you know, we ended up becoming close friends with them, and we're still pretty tight with them today. And they're almost like kind of a cornerstone of the industry. They organize a global float conference that we go to every year, where people from all over the world come down there, and, you know, who run centers and make tanks and provide other services that are kind of supporting the industry. So they were huge. That's the first thing that pops to my mind is, how do we do this? So big shout out to those guys. Their center's called Float On.
Okay.
And it's in Portland, Oregon. And if anybody is in that neck of the woods, I highly recommend going to check out their float center. It's sort of iconic. Cool. In the world of float centers.
Yeah. And then on that, like one thing I wanted, like, because we already started talking, the float, like assuming people know sort of what it is about. So can you guys tell a little bit about what flotation is? Maybe Anand can give like a little intro to that so that people can know what we're talking about.
Yeah, I'll give you a rough visual what it looks like. It's like, imagine maybe the dimensions of about a queen or even a king size bed with these new tanks that we have. So you're in there in about a foot of water, and that water is heated to your skin temperature. So the whole idea is that your body's now not having to adjust to gravity. It's not having to change its temperature. So a lot of these resources can be freed up. So there's that effect. There's also, you know, the release from the gravity will stretch out the joints. You've got, aside from that, all of the benefits of the magnesium getting into the body, and being able to soak them in over time. And beyond that, you have the combined effects. Beyond that, you have the sensory deprivation effects, which, you know, in this setup, you can have the lights on, you can have them off, you can have music on or off, other capabilities for sound or meditations that we still haven't even really pushed the limits of. So,
oh, imagine, yeah. So basically, it would be like to give a rough visual guide, it's like you have complete darkness. The temperature that you are in is basically the body temperature, and then you are basically floating because you have basically no effect of gravity because of the amount of the Epsom salts that are in the water. So you're just floating there, and then you hang out.
That's
right?
it. Yeah.
Like the basic idea of it is to restrict all external stimulus. So restrict all your senses simultaneously, right? So with no sound and no light, and basically no feeling, no tactile sensation, and like you're saying, creating an environment where all your muscles and bones can relax fully. Like you don't have to do any work to hold yourself up. And then it's almost like after a while, because there's no stimulus, your brain is always trying to interpret stimulus as it comes in, whether it be just, you know, sounds outside or, you know, whatever you're up to. But with no stimulus, your brain kind of goes into a mode where it's like, okay, I don't have to do anything. I don't have to interpret anything. I can just rest into this more kind of regenerative, you know, reflective, you know, mode.
One of the things that like going to this idea of like having like total sensory deprivation, right? One of the things that happened to me, at least, like when I went in on the first time, was you start paying attention to some very strange things. Like on the first time, I remember my breathing was so loud. I was like breathing in, and you can hear it in a very different way, right? And the other thing that I noticed was how much tension you actually have in your body, even when you don't have to, because I was laying down and then your ears are basically covered by the water, and it doesn't go actually further than what, like an inch after your ears, like, yeah. And then I remember like, I had like my arms down, so my shoulders were a little bit pronated. And it's like, I think I'm going to put my arms up. Yeah. And then it was like, okay, I found the position that was interesting for me. But what I found interesting is how much your mind, at least on the first time, fights to pay attention to something.
Exactly. And it's connected to the body, like how you touched on it, how you're going into this tank and now you're released from gravity and yet you're still noticing a holding. So you're feeling the difference between what energy you need to be putting out and what you are putting out. So that's where you have the chance to really let go into the environment and begin to build a trust over the number of floats that you do as well. And even within the session, so that you can actually just make that difference a little bit more and more until the point where you realize, yes, I'm in a tank and I don't actually require any tension. And then you meet that.
Yeah, that's the exactly what happened to me. And then you start thinking of all this well, everybody has a different experience, I assume. Especially, I was not afraid at all. I know that some people have. I keep telling my wife, "Oh, you should go, you should try it," but she's super claustrophobic and darkness. But then I said, "Oh, but you can have the lights on, you can have the music on." How would you guys recommend let's say a person is about to get into this, either here in Toronto or like in partners all around the world or other like flotation things. What's the attitude to have like the best experience like on the first time?
Well, I would say, first of all, keep an open mind as to what the experience is going to be like. You know, we try as much as possible not to sort of program people or, you know, insinuate what the experience is going to be like, because we don't know. You know, it seems to be really different for everybody. And it also depends how you're coming into it, right? What you're trying to get out of it, if you are trying to get anything out of it, or if you're trying to use it for a specific purpose. but it's definitely going to be different than you expect. So just try not to expect anything, I guess is the first thing. In terms of the claustrophobia kind of topic, which is, you know, something that comes up a lot. It seems to be pretty much the number one concern. And I actually have a theory that it's kind of a fake concern. It's not really real. Okay. And this is why. Because as you know, the tank is a lot bigger than you think. Oh, yeah. And that's going to be across the board wherever you float. These things are pretty large. They're not really so enclosed where you're, you know, feeling claustrophobic in that kind of way. Claustrophobia, I think, is more where you're in a situation where you can't get out, right? Like where you're in a crowd of people or in an airport or at a concert or something, and you literally are like, oh my God, I got to get out of here, and I don't see a way out, and there's too many things going on. The float tank, once you settle into the experience, you know, first of all, there's a light on, so you can leave it on as long as you want until you want to turn it off. I do recommend turning it off though eventually and trying that, because it's a pretty surreal kind of feeling.
Definitely.
But once you settle into the float, it feels the opposite of claustrophobic. You know, it feels sort of expansive and infinite and just there's no boundaries, you know, boundless kind of feeling. And then going beyond that, there's things like you don't want to eat right before you go in, because, you know, you can hear your stomach kind of gurgling in there and digesting. And you don't want to have caffeine right before you go in, because, you know, it's a stimulant. Any kind of stimulant is going to prevent you from settling into the experience. Anything else that comes up for you before people go in for their first time?
Well, there's this idea that the tank can be used for so many things, right? It can be like a nothing space, or it can be like an anything space. So as a general rule, especially for first time, because you asked for floating, it's like, it's nice to be open to the experience. And I believe in general, the tank just gives you what you need on that particular day. So you come in looking for mental relaxation, maybe it actually gives you an emotional release. And then the mental thing comes later. So it's like to be open to that, but also, you know, to if you have something that you have in mind that you're trying to work on or you're trying to figure out, it's like a great space for that as well. So just to know that you can float for a reason, you can also just be open and see what the tank offers.
That's a great way to see it. And I can totally vouch for the idea of like that. If you think it's going to be claustrophobic, well, at least on the tanks you guys have, that they're basically, you can just stand there, and it's actually quite large space. And as you said, I never noticed this, but like whenever you turn off the lights and then you don't have and then you settle in on the tank, it's boundless. It's you're floating in space, like it's and it's not really that you're journeying anywhere. It's sort of like you're stopped and you feel a vastness around, right? It's
and
like,
I think part of that also comes from the idea that regardless of physical space, it's like things in the world are always pressing on you. So, you know, if unless your phone is in airplane mode, there's things coming at you. There's pressure. There's people around you. There's energies, and this is a way to just separate from that as well and find that energetic space. You know, something that's rare.
Yeah, and that's actually a good point, because it's. Do you think I mean, of course, like Joe Rogan and like some other guys that were like really pushing for this, and then it became like a worldwide phenomenon, like really helped with it. But how much do you think it's because of our world today, of us on the phone all the time and having to be connected, that it seems to be like the more connected we are, suddenly we have this new technology trying to break at least for that hour, 2 hours that you stay in? Like, how much do you think is connected to our current state? Like,
yeah, I mean, floating is an amazing remedy for our modern day life, you know, and it was part of the reason we could have some confidence launching the business. You know, we had this deep feeling like, you know what, people are really going to want to do this, and this is going to be useful for people, because it's this complete disconnect. It's like unplugging the cord, the power cord, you know, it's turning the off switch in a way. Like if you get in a float tank and turn off the light and lie down, a certain amount of time goes by, or a certain amount of floats go by until you get it. You know, realistically, sometimes it takes a few times. You know, not everybody kind of gets to that kind of breakthrough float the first time they get in there, but eventually you kind of get the hang of it. And almost whether you like it or not, you kind of get brought into this deep physical and mental relaxation. Like your body is in a complete resting state. And because there's no distractions coming in, like Anand was saying, your mind just kind of settles in this peace, kind of serenity kind of feeling. And you start thinking about things that are a little bit bigger than, just the mundane kind of, just to-do lists and tasks that we are, kind of absorbed with. But yeah, I think the timing for it is right, right. And there's a couple things like, we kind of get nerdy with it when we're talking about how to improve the experience even more, but unless you can figure out how to provide more nothingness, there's nothing really more you can do to get in a scenario like the float tank. Like one thing that you could do, which I hope one day we can, I don't know if we're going to upgrade our tanks again or open up another place or something, but if we could make the tank circular, then you could also lose complete feeling for which direction your body's facing, because right now, it's kind of the only thing, like, spatially where you are, which way you lie down, where the door is, which way, Queen Street is. But if you could kind of drift anywhere in any direction, you would lose another layer of like where you are in space.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's something that like on my second float, I actually, when I put like my arms up, and so that people have an idea, it's basically like a square-ish bathtub material style kind of a thing. I don't know exactly what material guys use for
fiberglass.
Yeah. So, and then I remember like, okay, I'm going to touch the corners, like on all sides, so that I know exactly where I am, and then I let go. And then I sort of forgot about it, except like I remember I was being a bit anxious on the second float for like personal reasons. Like I was thinking of like bad stuff, and then you move around, and any movement you do actually puts you like in a little bit of motion, right? At least with me, that's what happened. And then suddenly I was like, oh, okay, I touched the corner. And then it immediately brought me back to where I was. I was like, no, okay, let me just put myself in the middle. I'm good. And then it went on. So, but it's interesting that like a totally circular one would take away that.
And they have them. They're out there.
Oh, really?
Cool. I've never floated in one, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it's very cool. So how was... if you guys, both of you could share, like, I know you wrote about this on a blog, like about your first experience and how was your first experiences?
My first experience floating, like we had touched on before, like it wasn't the most accessible experience to be able to find tanks. Also, when what we offer floats for now is like a fraction of what they used to be. And so I remember paying $100 for my first float, and did it a few years ago, and it was definitely worth that. I would pay $2,000, $5,000, $10,000 for my first float, because it really, if you're out there and looking into meditation and you're reading about these accounts of this or that meditator and this experience, or this or that technique, it's like, when you go in the tank, you're going to find your own experience of that and not just a copy of the technique, right? And so this was my experience with meditation and with floating that really woke me up to, okay, there's something here which is tangible, which is, something that you can always access within yourself, and you don't need to go to the Himalayas for it. Right. And so this was my experience with floating, which strengthened the whole direction of being able to look inward for our own healing.
And that's one thing, because your background, like you already had like experience with meditation and with yoga. So you went with that mindset towards
exactly. Yeah. So I kind of benefited in all the ways, because I'd started to train jiu-jitsu then, and I'm now more active in it. But even back then, I found that I had the physical benefit, the emotional benefit, the meditative benefit. So that's why maybe it hit me so hard at that time. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I had a side note. I had my first jiu-jitsu class like a couple of
amazing.
A week ago. It was like so interesting.
Oh yeah, you're gonna need the floats.
That was a whole other thing, because I was so disillusioned with the martial arts after doing Aikido and all these other things that were not, I mean, well, not to get into that thing, but it's anyway. So Jesse, how about you? How was your first float? You mentioned that it was like at the basement of someone and all that. So how was your first experience floating?
Yeah, it was great. You know, it was pretty profound. I'd heard about it from Joe on the podcast, and then I had done my own research, and I was kind of looking forward to it for many months. And like I said, I drove a couple hours away with my brother, and he went first. I waited in the lounge, and she had all these nice little meditation books and things like that waiting. So I was really chilled out. I was really in a good headspace for it, and I'd been thinking about it for a long time. And then I got in the tank, and you know, just the way that you can observe your thoughts in there without any distraction. There's really nothing like it. There's no other scenario you can put yourself in where everything is so clear, right? It's almost like you can be a witness to your thoughts in just much easier. And I definitely went pretty deep on my first one. Like I remember I came out of there, like I had gone into, you know, memories that I hadn't thought of in a long time from childhood. And I felt like I just had kind of some breakthrough thoughts on my own about things that were going on in my life. And then, like I said before, I just had this feeling like people are going to want to do this. Like it just seemed like how could it not be applicable to so many different things? Like right away, my mind was thinking about all the different avenues and people who have different interests would use it, whether it be for physical stuff, whether it be for emotional healing, whether it be for you know, repressed memories or visualization, like, you know, all that kind of stuff that I'd been researching. I saw it, I could feel it, like, wow, this thing is for real. Like it's kind of magic in a way. And just being on your back, lying supine, like even if you're just to lie on a yoga mat, like something happens to your body when you're in that position. Like you just automatically go into this, into like towards the relaxation response, because you're not upright looking at the world in the angle that we usually are. Right. You're on your back and you kind of, you start relaxing more. And then I remember on the ride home, me and my brother were just totally blissed out. We were talking so slowly.
Yeah.
I floated right before I came here too. So
oh, cool.
I got in the zone. And Anand's floating
shows,
later. Yeah. It was great. I know I'm kind of babbling about it, but I really had a great experience. It really like, it was like all I expected and more. And from then on, I went on this journey with my business partner, Sean, you know, and we tried all different tanks in the area. And you know, we had different ideas for what we were going to do in terms of the business. Initially, we were going to start one in Vancouver. And then by the time we actually got, you know, all of our stuff together to begin looking for a space, there was another center that was kind of announcing their opening. So we kind of put our whole thing on the back burner and waited to see what that looked like. And this beautiful float center opened up. They're called Float House. We're friends with the guys that run that place. And it was amazing. It was a home run. It was like, you know, actualizing what we had been kind of imagining in our home city. And it just gave us also a place to float. And it made everything a little bit more real in terms of making the leap to the next level. And then when we actually got like the courage and the money and the business plan together to actually do it ourselves, we decided that we'd be better off going somewhere else where we could be kind of first to market in a way, right? Because there was a lot on the line. It was quite a big initial investment. Yeah. And as we looked at the map of Canada, we wanted to stay in Canada. Toronto just kind of was sort of speaking to us, you know, it was the biggest city that we have, and there was not much here at the time. And it seemed like the city could probably use it based on just like how fast everything moves here and how many people there are and how dense it is. It seemed like a perfect fit. So then our dream kind of shifted a little bit, and we went on this mission to, you know, we pretty much uprooted. We packed up a car of all our things. You know, we came out here a few times to check out the lay of the land and find a location and kind of see what everything was like. But eventually we kind of packed up and drove over. We didn't know anybody in the city.
Oh, wow.
We found our location on the west side over in, you know, near Parkdale there. and we set up shop. And Anand was one of the first people that reached out to us when he found us online that we were going to be setting up the center. And yeah, he had already written a blog piece about it, and he was super interested in it. And we connected with him very soon after, before we even opened.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
cool.
exactly.
So from the beginning,
From the show.
Yeah,
wow.
exactly.
That's it.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, the one thing that you mentioned, like on the post float sensation, it's a very interesting thing. That it's like you're slower, you're calmer. You even approach certain things like, at least for me, it was okay, I'm gonna grab my phone. Why am I grabbing my phone right now? That kind of stuff. And then, of course, yes, I have to reply to this thing and talk about that thing, prepare that thing. But you start seeing things with a different, and I'm sure it wears off at certain points, but just having the experience of like that, I remember what it was to have that, not only the float like moment, but the post float, which to me was the same in the 3 times that I went already. Like it was basically the same. Like you're chill. You are the probably not very good analogy, but I made for Yana yesterday. It's like as if you had a terrible hangover, but without a hangover.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it makes
to people,
sense.
but
Yeah.
it's like you don't want to deal with anything, but you're not irritated, and you're not like overly excited, not overly calm. It's not like you are. There's no apathy. You're just engaged in things. It was quite fantastic, which is why I wanted to talk to both of you guys to
we
about
know what
this.
you mean.
Well, that makes me think of I feel like when people also start to go in, it's such a contrast to the regular baseline state, the level of relaxation that you feel after, that it can be very hard, especially the first few times, to really approach any activity. So sometimes it's not uncommon to have first-time floaters just not even aware of how long they're out of it after the float, because it's so different from their regular pace. So it's going to be almost in sync with how tuned up they are in their regular life. So they may not they may stick around for a couple hours after their float easy just to like tune back. So I remember at the beginning I tried to go to a more up pace vinyasa yoga class after a float, and I couldn't do it.
Right.
I couldn't force myself to that pace. But then you find as you do more floats, it actually changes your baseline state. So the difference between the post float state and your regular state is less and less. So you still need a bit of adjustment time because you're in space basically, but you can come out and reintegrate into the world faster. And it becomes less foreign, because a lot of the time you have people come out and say, well, now it's time to get back into the normal world. Well, if you can have control over your state of mind, what's the normal world?
Right. No, that's great point. Deep. Yeah, no, that's really cool. I haven't thought yet. I haven't floated enough to think in that way, but it's like a spiritual exercise in a way, right? It's like it's exactly that. Like how you engage with everything will determine your experience.
Yeah,
right?
like why separate it? Why do you have to be relaxed now and then not relax later? It's like just keep it going.
That's really cool. Yeah, and then in terms of, I know that you guys have like, just to talk a little bit of the operations of things, of how it works, it's to be interesting for folks to see. But you guys have like in the center have like 5 flotation tanks, correct? Right? And then one of the things that I thought was really cool that you have there that I didn't spend an hour there, but that would have been a good idea. Like there is like at the entrance, basically, there is like some couches and places where you guys put there are some books, there is some visual stuff, there is like some artwork, there is some books you can actually write your thoughts on. So you invite people to explore the experience. And I thought that little space that is like very inviting, and you have like tea that is delicious and all that. Then that sort of like gave an interesting aspect to it. It's like you just don't go in and then kick you out. You sort of like just stand around. So how other flotation places have this kind of environment, or is it something that you guys learn from someone, or what's your approach to that part?
it's a good observation, and it's a great thing to touch on, because we always try, if we can, to recommend that people don't rush out of there. You know, when you come out of the float, you're really turned down, and it's nice to kind of integrate a little bit by just sitting, not going back right on your phone if you don't have to, if you don't have something pressing. Let the experience kind of settle. And yeah, we provide a space for that to happen. It was one of the things that the first float center in Vancouver didn't have, that we thought was needed and necessary. Mm-hmm. So it was definitely a priority and something that was very important to us to have. Watching people, the contrast of how people look and act and feel when they come in to when they come out of the tank is one of just the best things about operating a flotation center. Yeah. It's unreal how much people change sometimes. Like it might as well be two different people. You know, someone could come in almost like outwardly angry at, you know, obviously not us or anything, just something that's going on with them, but just carrying some kind of angst. And that maybe even us at times, you know, I'm not saying like anyone in particular, but that's just someone will come in carrying whatever energy they're coming in with, go in that tank and come out smiling, wanting to tell you about their experience, some kind of breakthrough or whatever. So yeah, we have this little lounge there, and we have books that are like basically just drawing books. There's an art store next door, so we always keep a stock with like some nice big blank pages and colors, and you know, often people say that colors look brighter after they come out of there, after you've been in darkness. And, you know, these very interesting, you know, insights come to them that they want to write down right away. So, you know, that's another purpose of that. The float is very slippery at the same time. You might be in the tank having 10 revelations about something, and then by the time the music comes on at the end, you have 3 of them pretty solid in your head. And then you get in the shower and you get dressed and you get to the tank, get to the lounge, and maybe you just have one, right? And then you get that one out. So it's sort of like the float brings you into a sort of dream state almost, where it is a little bit hard to hold on to some things sometimes. You know, it's kind of likened to a psychedelic experience minus the drugs. Right. You know, it's sort of this sober psychedelic kind of experience for some people.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. You were gonna say something about that. Oh, okay. So no, I was just gonna say that. This revelations. I called it like I was telling like my wife like, oh, this is sort of like a revelation moment, like so like the little mountain that is like a little revelation moment, because there is always some insight that is completely unexpected. At least to me. I mean, I had only 3 floats so far, but in each one of them, I can totally relate to the dreams. It's like, oh, I had this 10 epiphanies, and you only will remember 1 or 2 at the end. But I remember writing down everything right after. And then I remember getting like something that was so like absolutely obvious, but profound at the same time. And then just even if you're not going to write on the books that you have in the like in the front, like specifically like for other people, it's like, okay, that just reminded me, oh, there is something to be shared afterwards, or at least something that I will take away from the experience from like epiphany point of view. And getting into this idea that you touched upon about the like say psychedelics without the drugs. One of the things I remember reading on the beginning, like about it with John Lilly, that sort of like started this thing, was actually that they were actually trying to not induce but facilitate psychedelic experiences, right? Can you guys talk a little bit about that aspect of flotation?
Yeah, absolutely. Like the early days of flotation. So just to kind of give people an idea of how far this goes back, the first commercial flotation tank was first actualized in the 50s. Oh. So there was a whole wave of floating that went into the 60s and the 70s, and it got really popular, and there was like float centers all over the place that were busy, and people were coming, and it seemed to be, you know, a thing that was going to catch on. And then for a number of different reasons, the whole industry completely fell off and basically tanked in the 80s. And then now we're seeing like a new wave and a sort of resurgence of it, and the technology is better and the filtration systems are better, and like even the purpose for why people are seeking it seems to be a little bit different. You know, it's like not only a sort of psychedelic hippie-ish kind of experience that maybe it was once spun as sort of, but now it's also linked to like holistic health and wellness and, you know, stress reduction and athletes using it for visualization and things like that. But John Lilly, the guy who created the float tank, he was a scientist. He was a psychonaut. He was interested in studying the nature of consciousness. He was going in these tanks under like the influence of some very powerful substances and trying to communicate with aliens. And like at the end of it, he like did it. According to him, he like, it was mission accomplished. So he was trying to decode dolphin communication and stuff like that. Like he's a very interesting fella. We could talk about him all day. Sorry, what's the exact question you have about it?
What's the relationship between this, like the psychedelic experience and the float experience? Like, so you were talking about how it changed over time, and that now it's more from a health and wellness kind of a thing. So how does it like today compare to how people were like thinking before? Especially because if you're not having any like stimulants before you go in, which is the experience I have, you'll probably have a totally different experience than if you are under some sort of drug. So how does that
I mean, like
some thoughts on that?
Yeah, like some thoughts on that are like, it can be a very psychedelic experience. Like that's, just put that out there, and it is for a lot of people. People see flowers of life and kaleidoscope colors and things like that, but not everybody, and maybe not even that often, you know, like that's not something that people should expect to happen. But there is some people who come out of there and they're like, oh, that was a cool light show that you guys had going on in there. Like, what was that about? It was like, this was in our old tanks when we had no lights at all. Now we have like a light that you can turn on, and we're like, oh no, man, there's like no lights in there at all. That was just in your, you know, in your mind or your pineal gland or something. But and like, they just would not believe it. But you know, we don't advise people to like take psychedelics and go into the tank. It's not needed. You know, but you know, if we're being completely honest, we have no control over what people do. People take all different substances and do all types of different things. You know what I mean? So there may be one that is like, you know, some certain people are comfortable with using that, you know, they would experiment with in there. I would always advise people to try it without it first to see how psychedelic it is on its own. John, like I said before, like he was interested in studying a lot of those psychedelic substances in and outside of the tank. And he was going beyond just like, you know, just mushrooms, and like he was injecting himself with ketamine and going in there and like, you know, going in for like long floats and having IV drips and, you know, to keep himself hydrated and things like that. Like they got to a pretty intense level with it.
No, that's interesting. No,
but there's certainly a crossover with the two. Like I like that you asked the question, because there's a lot of people who don't want to go there and don't want to sort of touch on the fact that a big piece of the origins of these things was linked to psychedelic use. And it was in the sort of the 70s and the hippie kind of age when the whole boom was happening with the initial kind of commercial float tanks. So there was probably a lot more, you know, kind of not only crossover with it then, but it was probably more of that hippie kind of crowd that was drawn to it. Whereas now it's just such a diverse range of people coming in to use the tank. Like not necessarily people who are even know about any psychedelics.
No, that's really cool. And just to go to the idea of like wellness and the relationship to other physical activities, something that like you coming from yoga, from meditation and jiu-jitsu. So how do you see the combination of other kinds of activities that have a element of mindfulness and the spiritual seeking? How do you see that as a relationship to the experience in the tank?
So for me, I actually connect the two questions. So to me, drugs is inside and outside, right? So if you remember Salvador Dali at some point, he always told people, I am drugs, I am the drugs that you're taking, these paintings, right? And so to me, I think these drugs that people take from outside to go in the tank with or to explore with, those are not just drugs on their own. They're interacting with our chemistry as well and what's going on with us. So it's like we can talk about the fluctuation of our states as being on drugs. You can use the tank to come off of drugs. You can use the tank to change your state and reintroduce new drugs that your brain is producing now. You can use the tank to turn off drug production in your body as well, right? Your hormones, because your stress hormones go down. And so it's like you can really start to look at it more fluidly from an inside and outside perspective of like the drugs are happening inside me. Maybe I'm exploring as well, you know, so there's an interaction that's happening. Yeah. And this also interacts with the things. So the drugs are like almost like a shortcut or an express, you know, method to create this change quickly. And then if you want to combine it with touching on these other treatments, which are amazing to combine with floating. So not only small things that you can do like journaling, like meditation, but, you know, also therapies that you get from somebody else. Like we've had people work with body talk practitioners. We've had in our own experience and with our patients talking about combining acupuncture, combining other therapies, osteopathy, you know, massage with floating, cold therapies, you know, it's endless really. So you can kind of decide the float tank, what it does is really give you the awareness to decide how you should be affecting, whether you do need any substances to affect it, whether you need to remove substances from your body, stop ways of being, introduce new ways of being to actually handle what's going on inside in this inner chemistry in that soup.
And then that would also go into like if you have a yoga practice or like I don't know, like lifting weights or all those things, like the float would be like to determine your baseline, sort of like in a way, or like at least to have like a grounding, like that's sort of like how you guys are seeing because it will interact with whatever else you're doing, right?
I could see that as it being a thing, or like yoga could take on the place of like some people might float on a nootropic like 5-HTP. So it's like if you do a jog and then get in the tank, is that not something similar?
Oh, interesting.
Right. And then something else to note as well for people looking at exploring is that, yeah, you should be really comfortable with the tank because even Lilly, with all his crazy explorations, he committed to 10 years of free exploring on his own with a sober mind. And then he started to introduce these drugs one at a time. So it's like, really, you want to be comfortable with the experience, know what it's about, and get those benefits which are to be had from the natural unlocks, and then see if you'd like.
Yeah, and that takes me to like one question that I had regarding how often people, it's just like any other kind of activity. Should it be like every week? Should be every day? Should be like, and of course there's no shoulds on these kinds of things. Depends on the person's journey and ability. But like in terms of like a baseline, is this something you want to do every year as an anniversary, or is it every week would be a good thing, or is it as per whenever it's needed? So what are your thoughts on how often to do it?
Another good question. And like you said, there is no correct amount, right? There's no correct amount. There's no prescription. However, there is a bit of a residual to the experience. Like if you have a float, you're going to feel it probably for the next few days, you know, at least the rest of the night, at least probably the next day in some way. For me, I'm feeling it 3-4 days after a float. So like you said, like a lot of people will use it once in a while as a, you know, sort of, recentering or a reflection kind of time. From my personal experience, I can kind of tell you how that went. So first, I was floating more kind of erratically, I would say, like sometimes more, sometimes less, multiple times a week. And now 4 years in, I've kind of settled at the same time every week. And I really like that because now I sort of anticipate it a little bit. I can kind of mentally prepare for it in a way. If I'm going to try to get something out of it, you know, I know that it's coming. and it gives me this kind of like regular check-in with myself and with the tank, and just, you know, in that kind of routine. So we have a lot of people who will do that. A lot of people will book the same session each week and come and use it that way, or be at the same time every month. Some people will do it, you know, some people will do it once a month, twice a month, once a week. And then once in a while, like today was a special instance where I knew I was coming here. You know, whenever I haven't done many of these kind of podcasts and things like that, but when I do, I try to get in the tank before, just for fun. So I'm in the kind of float state of mind. And Anand floats quite a bit, probably a lot more than me. So I'll let him, describe how he goes through that.
The way I like to think of it is like, it's like yoga or eating greens or anything else that's like positive for you, or a medicine. It's like, how often should you do that? If you eat greens today, you'll get the benefit of eating greens today, but then if you don't eat it for another month, then that may be an issue, right? So it's like, you need to decide what it gives you and how often you need that. So I would say it's partly in relation to if what you're using it for. So if it's for an athletic recovery, then you need to be floating often, get those benefits. If it's for meditation and you have a regular practice, maybe you only need to come in once every couple weeks, once every month, to really hit that level of deep meditation to spark you to be able to practice that. So it will depend on you. Personally, I find with this particular medicine, there's no overdose, because I would have found it. I actually, as a float doctor, recommend the most floats you can do as often as possible for as long as you can.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because the way that I think about it, the way it works is something very special about float, which we haven't quite touched on, is actually, it's a lot of it to do with your mind-body connection. So a lot of issues that are happening are people drifting away from their own body, their own current experience. So the float brings you back, and the longer that you're in the tank, the more focused your mind becomes, and the more powerful of a healing tool it becomes for you. So that's why I think Jesse touched on doing double floats once a week. So the longer floats, you get into a deeper space rather than maybe a few 1 hour floats. So yeah, there's no right or wrong.
I just have a couple more things to add about that. Like, also, the more you do it, like a lot of things, the easier it is to get into that kind of deep sort of meditative mode when you're in the tank. Like, the more often you do it, the easier and quicker you're able to kind of settle into the experience. And also, each time you go in the float, it's almost like you're kind of resetting or, restarting your nervous system. And the more you do it, the harder it is for your nervous system kind of to rebound to those elevated states that create kind of, I think, the anxiety and stuff like that. So there's like a compounding effect that happens the more you float.
No, that makes sense. I asked that because it was one of those things, like on my last float, which was my third, and then I've been like writing the things that happen, like I on the end of this last session was the one time I got to a different way. Like, I stopped, because before you had this thing of like, oh, I'm going to have a deep experience. Come on, deep experience, come.
Exactly.
And then at some point it actually happens, and then you were like,
when you
flattered
forget.
with yourself. It's like, oh, cool. Like, oh wow, I could think of this way. But then
deep.
And then at some point, this last time, I was like, oh, I'm going to go with no expectations. And then I was thinking all over the place about all sorts of things. And then at some point, it was the first time that I thought, how long have I been here? And then I was like, well, actually, it doesn't matter. And then I started thinking, like, I asked myself questions and answers came. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then at some point, I was like, okay, now I'm focused. I'm okay. Like, I'm in the moment. I'll stay here for a while. And then I thought, oh, it would be great to stay here for actually another hour, because I think the time's coming up. And then music comes and the light comes. And I was like, oh, but that was a very, like, although not necessarily an aha moment, but it was like a tuning in with yourself, which was very interesting. And I don't remember having any of these experiences in other environments that let's say easily. Like sometimes after you, I don't know, if you play instruments or whatever thing that is your like that you're in, put you in a flow state, like Csikszentmihalyi style, right?
Yeah.
Like that kind of stuff. Cool, like you get into that kind of thing, but I find that the flotation thing sort of like forces you into like a realignment, right? Is that an experience that you guys find very common?
And that's what's really awesome about it too, is like this part of this flow state, and Csikszentmihalyi and the characterization of it is autotelic activity. So activity that's done for its own sake. And, you know, you can do, like you said, playing an instrument, playing sports. It's like all these things require things, maybe other people. But if you can be able to just find that natural flow state, like you found that reset, then that's really powerful, because there's nothing happening in the tank. So you're able to just get into that flow state on your own and without anybody around, any tools. So it's like this becomes like a very valuable resource, something to cultivate.
That's cool. And in terms of one thing that I wanted to ask, let me just check my notes here. Yes, so one thing, like just technology wise, like I know that there are, as you mentioned, there are some tanks that they are, and people can, we'll have links on show notes for like the photos of tanks and stuff. I remember seeing the first ones, they look like this like clamshell kind of a thing, and you go in. And what one of the things when I saw like your center was like, oh, this is actually a big space, like, and then as soon as you get out and you go take a shower, there is this filtration system that starts. And so can you talk a little bit about the technology of the tanks and how they influence this, like the experience that people have?
Yeah. So the technology has gotten to an amazing level with flotation tanks. And basically what happens is that in between each person, the water that's in the tank is pumped out, and it passes through a multi-stage filtration system that has several different components to it that basically clean the water, sterilize everything, and return the water to the float tank. And it goes through that system 5 times. So it goes through a UV light,
right?
You know, it goes through a pool grade 1 micron filter, which is like a very small, you know, filter that gets any, you know, sand or anything. And then it gets dosed with ozone, and also hydrogen peroxide, which is like a natural disinfectant. So it would be as if you went in a pool and you're the only one in that pool, and then you got out of the pool, and then all of the pool water got cycled through a very advanced filtration system 5 times, and then another person got in the pool. So that's it, just to give you an idea. It's like we're basically obsessed with that process, because that's what allows us to operate our business as a commercial space. Right. So we're also like pool operators and really nerdy about all things around that subject as well. And we put a lot of, you know, studies and sort of like, you know, we're interested in that.
Cool. Yeah. And that it's like from like I guess like health, safety, like cleanliness. I know that the center is like absurdly clean compared to any place, I guess, in Toronto. But it's besides that, what I find so interesting is like the fact that you have that also that little light and the music. Yeah, it just, I think even for people that would be like, oh, I'm not sure, just go in. Exactly. Let it's nice lights. It's actually kind of interesting to stay there for a couple minutes with the lights on, and even the music you guys choose. I don't know how it was chosen. Maybe we can even talk about that, like the ending. I don't know if it's something that came with the system, the Debbie prayer. Huh?
Yeah, we at the end of the flotation experience, to wake you up, there's a song that comes on very gently, and we have transducers and underwater speakers that are not underwater speakers, but transducers that are speakers attached to the under of the tank, that transmit the sound through. So it's this very gentle kind of track that comes on to initially wake people up, and then the lights come on about a minute later. And the song that we have chosen is called the Devi Prayer, and it's just, you can maybe attach it in the show notes. It's a really beautiful song, and it's very gentle and slow, and it's this beautiful woman singing. Yeah, and we just liked it. And
I was curious about I was curious about the
it.
choice of song, because on my first experience was that music comes in and then it's like the perfect ending for the session. And I was actually looking forward to hear it. Like I was like, oh, I remember that song. Like it came to, like, it was on my mind. It's like, okay, like great touch. Like
if you have some kind of song that you link to this podcast to intro it at the beginning or something, you should fade out this podcast with that song.
With that song. I could even start it. That's a great idea. Cool. Yeah, we'll have to hook me up with that song, because it's really good. Yeah, you guys do a great job there. One last thing to talk. Is there anything I forgot to ask that you guys want to mention? Even from the benefit side, or anything? I think it was fairly thorough, but anything I forgot that you guys want to say?
Maybe just touching on the performance side of things, because we talk a lot about, people are at some kind of energy deficit or feeling some kind of deficit, and how floating can be used to take them not only to feeling okay or at level, but then even above. So a lot of the people that come to mind are the athletes that have been coming in and out of the center. So personally, as I've experienced through healing my own injuries through competitive jiu-jitsu, but also we have had a number of the Blue Jays come to float, who we've been sponsoring for the last couple of years, healing injuries and getting back in the game, prolonging potentially some seasons, maybe even some careers. And then we have had some endurance athletes. We've had MMA fighters who are well-known, Muay Thai fighters, other athletes, swimmers, and so the list just goes on. And the interesting thing is that it's not only high twitch sports, high speed, but it's also endurance. So wherever you're at, it can also help to take you higher, not only on that physical side, but also, the mental side, being able to go in, shut out all of the previous beliefs and outside kind of stuff, and be able to generate, the ability to perform at a higher level, and reintroduce new beliefs and test the limits of visualization and that kind of power that it can have. It's something which I think will have a lot of potential for growth in the next little bit, not only bringing people up to a level, but bringing them beyond that.
No, it's cool.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. How about you, Jesse? Anything else you want to mention?
Yeah, I would just say, if anybody's, curious about, more about the actual business, to check out the website, float-toronto.com.
Yes.
We have a lot of information on there, and there's also an orientation video right on the front page of that website that will show, what the experience looks like and what the center looks like. And then we have a really user-friendly software system that people can book their float online and choose a time that's, right for them. And but no, I think we covered a lot. Yeah, we covered everything, I think.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And just one last thing that I just got to my mind, because I actually highly recommend going to the center. If people are in Toronto, if they can drop by and check out, I absolutely recommend, because it's and you guys do this cool thing that it's you have an introductory class, and then the people will come for more. It was the case for me. My wife goes, oh, if you want, go take one float, and then they have this 3-deal package, and that's one thing that you guys, I assume, created and tweaked by design, right? It's okay, you can come, take a look, and then if you want, you can have a few more, and then you can basically get hooked and interested and continue, right? So it's something that you guys offer, right? It's a one class, one introductory float, and then you have a 3-package, a 3-float package, and then you have memberships and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, in general, we have very, very affordable pricing. Yeah. That's kind of the gist of it. We made this, our whole mission was to make it affordable and accessible, because it was around before, we were saying that you could find them, but he paid $100 for his first float. So did I, $100. And now with the price range at our place is averaging more around $40. Yeah. For people who are coming regularly. So. Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I thought was very interesting, not only from your business, but just knowing the float, let's say, community in general, that I've seen, is that once you get into it, you really want to put the word out there, right? It's like when you fall in love, you want to tell the world, right? It's that kind of a thing. And I thank you guys for like making this like your passion into an actual dream.
Yes,
and
thank you for spreading the word, because it's like you said, you want to see that out there, and the more people we can see out there being relaxed and not wound up, it's like just makes society that much more fun, makes Toronto a better city to live in.
Oh, for sure.
You know?
And what you said in the beginning, like at some point, like having people seeing their state of mind coming in and then going out was actually something that I thought, that's probably priceless for you guys that work there. Like to see like, it only took an hour for you to disengage. So it's, I guess, like a cool takeaway. It's like you have these opportunities to change your life, change your mind. So like right at your fingertips, and you just go and float.
That's it. Yeah, hit that off switch. It's now that it's there.
Cool.
It's just it's an interesting experience. If anyone is feeling interested in it, I highly recommend coming at some point when you're ready to at least have one experience, and just to kind of scratch that itch of figuring out what it's like, because there's no other environment that I've come across that is quite that, just tranquil and serene, and really feeling like you get that deep reset.
Cool. And then on that note, Jesse, Anand, thank you so much for being in the Wanderings podcast, and hope to see you guys soon. Whenever you guys come up with, whenever you find a way to get the dump mind before the float or any kind of new things, just always welcome to come back and talk a little bit more about that. And if any people have like questions or anything, or comments, just send us our way. We'll have links to the website and social media on the show notes. And again, thank you so much, guys.
Thank you so much, Pedro.
Yeah.
So that's it for today's show. Thank you for listening to the Wanderings podcast. You can find show notes and links at pedrobonatto.com/podcast. If you like the show, I would love if you could share it with your friends or leave a review on iTunes. If you want to get in touch with me, you can find me on all social media at Pedro Bonatto. I would love to hear from you. You can find my photography work at pedrobonatto.com. Here is a part of the beautiful song that plays at the end of flotation sessions at Float Toronto. It is called Devi Prayer by Craig Pruess and Ananda. You can purchase it at their website, Ananda's Art. So tune in next week for another show. Until then, I urge you to keep following your curiosity, and I'm looking forward to our next wanderings together.
Namastasye